Good afternoon and welcome to another live stream here on DreamBank's social channels. My name is Andy Frisky. I am a senior curator at DreamBank. Really excited to introduce our featured speaker today and welcome all of you. Before I go ahead and do that though, wanted to highlight a couple items here, a little bit as to who we are and why we are here. So if this is your first time tuning in, DreamBank is a free community resource that is put on by American Family Insurance. We're located in Madison, Wisconsin, and we are dedicated towards the inspiration and pursuit of dreams. And in large part, we do that through the programs that we offer. So we host right around 20 to 25 virtual events right now, 9 distinct event series. So this one happens to fall under our business series, but we also have events that range in career, family-related activities. We have a crafting event series, Dream Big, which is our inspiration, motivational, and wellness speaker series. So we really try and cover the gamut in terms of our offerings and our ideas. One thing I really wanted to highlight in particular, though, is our third annual Dream Summit. So what is the Dream Summit? The Dream Summit is a 2 days of motivational keynotes and inspirational workshops where you're able to virtually meet like-minded attendees and speakers and explore your dreams and how to achieve them. We have a really star-studded lineup this year. Speakers such as Tan France, Glennon Doyle, Drew and Jonathan Scott, and Chef Jeff Henderson, to name a few. So I'll be sure to include the link to the summit in the chat there, free of charge to go ahead and register and attend. So I highly encourage you that you check that out. But let me go ahead and jump over to our featured speaker today, Kann. So Chris has over 30 years of business experience, including time in corporate marketing positions and as an entrepreneur. She's always felt called to the world of business, loving every minute of her time at the University of Wisconsin-Madison while receiving her bachelor's and master's in business. And after spending over a decade in public and private companies, Chris started her first business and connected with her true calling as an entrepreneur. As a registered corporate coach, Chris brings her knowledge of the ups and downs of corporate environments, career transitions, and work-life challenges to her sessions with clients. She believes that the best way to be an exceptional leader, business owner, or manager is to know yourself. Knowing your own strengths, weaknesses, work styles, drivers, emotional intelligence, and triggers allows you to make the most out of your natural gifts, as well as to see them in others. Using items such as a custom disc analysis, time management assessment, and other tools designed for personal and professional insight, she helps to guide clients to experiencing more fulfillment in their life and career. Today, she's going to be talking about the 4 secrets to asking better questions. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and take it over to Chris. Chris, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. It always is really exciting. First of all, I love working with Andrew. I love working with DreamBank, and I love the mission of DreamBank. So it's wonderful to be back here sharing with all of you. And I want to thank, again, American Family and DreamBank for sponsoring today's talk and for all the great opportunities that they provide for people to learn and grow with their webinars and their classes. I've loved hearing about that upcoming DreamBank Summit. That sounds really exciting. I think this is the 4th webinar that I've done, and it's always a wonderful experience. And so with all of that said, again, thank you for having me, and thank you for being here to hear what we're going to talk about today. So an in-depth exploration about asking better questions is really a dream discussion for me because it's a topic that I am passionate about. And it's a skill that I'm always trying to get better at myself. And I think it's an exciting topic for us to explore today because I believe it's something that is important no matter what work you do. But also, I think that it's something that people tend to overlook as a skill. You really do have such power with the questions that you ask. And I hope that in our time together, I can give you some tools for your next conversation that can make it more productive. So it's really helpful for me to get feedback from you during our time together. So I want to invite you to use the chat to share your thoughts, as well as any maybe questions that you have as we go along. I'll keep an eye on it as best I can. Sometimes I feel like I have so many things on the screen that I won't see it right away. I'll keep an eye on it. And if Andrew can maybe pop in if there's something that I've missed that we need to address right away. But to get started, to help me out a little bit, I'd love if you could put some notes in the chat about what your professions are so that I have a sense of the focus that you're all coming to this discussion from. So share with me, are you parents? Are you coaches? Are you entrepreneurs? Are you accountants? Are you scientists? I'm guessing teachers are in school, so I'm not sure we'll have any teachers here at this time of day. But I'd love to know a little bit about what your perspective is, what the work that you do is. So if you could drop that in the chat, maybe I can try to cover some specifics about that as we go along. In my professional life, I have been a market researcher for, I lose track, but I think it's about 24 years this fall. And I'm also a registered corporate coach. And I also had a radio show and podcast for 4 years. So I've had a chance to ask a lot of questions, as you can imagine. And I'm going to be drawing on much of that experience in the thoughts that I share with you today. I had an experience a number of years ago that really drove this topic of asking questions home for me when I found that the shoe was on the other foot. Usually I'm the one asking questions, but at one point I was in a situation where the shoe was on the other foot and I got asked a really powerful question, and it really caught me off guard, and it inspired me to be even more aware of understanding the process of asking better questions. So I want to share that experience with you because I think it ties into this picture that you're seeing on the screen that you may be a little bit baffled by right now. And I think it probably demands a little bit of explanation. So as I mentioned, I used to have a radio show and podcast, and I was having coffee after I had completed an interview with an entertainer friend of mine. And I had been at a couple events where I had watched him do sort of mentalist kind of tricks. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but he always did this fork bending skill and this trick that had always left me amazed. Right in front of me, he would twist a fork, and I was always a little bit befuddled by it. And in fact, I'd seen him do it a number of times, and the fork that is pictured here is one that he left me as a bit of a souvenir after one of his events. So we're having this conversation after I've interviewed him for my show. Here we were in this private moment, we're in this coffee shop, away from any eyes or ears of an audience or, anyone that might overhear us. And in that moment, my curiosity got the best of me. And I leaned in and I asked him, so it's just you and me here. Tell me how you bend the fork. And to my surprise, he also paused for a minute and before responding to me, and then he leaned in and said, do you really want to know? And it was at that moment that I realized that in fact was the question. My question of how do you bend the fork was really not as interesting as did I really want to know? And I mean, here the answer to my confusion about the bent fork was within my reach. He was open to telling me right then and there. We had developed a friendship and he was going to tell me. And yet in that moment, I realized that the answer was actually not as important as this question that he had just asked me. I mean, did I want to know? Did I want the curtain pulled back on the rush of amazement I would always get when I watched him perform this trick? I mean, wasn't there some sort of giddy mystery in believing that magic existed? And so it only took me a minute to realize that, in fact, I really liked living in the awe and the fantasy that the unknown about this trick offered to me. And the bigger impact for me really was that I was so changed by his question and the self-reflection that it put me into that it really had stopped me in my tracks. And I never did get the answer to that question. And many people, especially friends, have told me that I was crazy for not seizing that moment and getting inside his mind and having him tell me how he did this trick. But really the more important takeaway from that conversation for me was that I realized that I needed to step back and take a closer look at how I was asking questions because he floored me. And so, sometimes I think after we have had many years of experience on a topic, we think we've learned all there is to know. If you ever feel that way, consider that a red flag because you never know all there is to know. But since I had asked so many questions in my life, I was really taken aback. And that moment reminded me that it was important for me to rethink what I had been trained to do as a researcher and what I had been trained to do as a coach, and to really revisit some of the habits that I had. And that's the basis from what I'm sharing with you today. This devoted quest that I have always had, but especially since then, to renewing my commitment to always try to be better at asking questions. So think of your ability to ask better questions as a skill that you can bring added value to any work that you do and other aspects of your life, of course. In a world of Google and Siri, we have answers in our pockets on our smartphone. My smartphone is right next to me. Sound is off, of course, but we have answers to questions right at our fingertips. You can type any question into Google, and an answer will be revealed to you. So you want to challenge yourself to ask better questions than can be typed into Google. So what that means is that you want to refine how you access emotion and motivation and inspiration, because that's something that Google can't do, right? At least not yet. Incorporating these human characteristics like empathy and compassion and emotion into our conversations and our questions is one of the essential keys to unlocking what is at the heart of a situation and what is going on with the person that you're speaking to in a way that is authentic and human. So I want to start by diving a bit deeper into my statement that questions are important and that you should consider this a skill worth developing. I'm not sure that you don't believe me, but let me just talk through a little bit about why I think questions are so important. Because we always want to remember the why of asking questions. What are we trying to accomplish? What do we hope to have be the outcome of our questions or of the conversation that we are in? Often we're trying to open up a conversation with someone or develop a deeper understanding of a person or of an event, or we're trying to get some answers. In other situations, we might be seeking to develop intimacy with someone just to get to know them better, to deepen a relationship, whether that's personal or professional. Or we're asking questions because we're curious about what is driving an individual or a situation. I have been a curious question asker my whole life. So often that's what's driving me. I'm just simply curious all the time. Now, let's not forget that there are likely questions that you've been asked that have impacted your life powerfully. In fact, you've forgotten probably some of these. One of the first questions that you're asked as a little kid is, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right? And that begins the process of important questions that you get asked over the course of your life. If you have a partner in your life, you may have been asked the question, will you marry me? Or maybe that's in your future, right? That's a question that can change your life. That simple question. And what can be more powerful than Hamlet's question about his very existence? To be or not to be? That is the question. So suffice to say that no matter if you're a parent or you're an employer or an employee or whomever in our discussion today, you should not underestimate how much you can impact a situation, a conversation, or a relationship with your questions. And I want to take a second to note, I see that you're putting some of your professions in because I want to orient back to that. I see qual research consultant, yes, Lynn, project manager, policy and procedures technician, training and development. Ooh, some really good data-based, research-based professions, and that's really good. I obviously have an orientation as a researcher, and these questions are not necessarily research-oriented, but obviously asking good questions for all of you as scientists, researchers, trainers is really important. And so again, it's helpful to make sure that you always remember how important questions are. Now, another important perspective is that making sure you ask the right questions is more than half the battle in accomplishing your objective in a conversation and getting answers that point you to the truth. The key thing is that you want to make sure that you're asking the right questions. You want to be thoughtful about the questions that you ask to make sure they're the right ones for the goal of your conversation and the person and the circumstance that you're in. So let's say that you're considering a trip with your partner or with a friend, and you begin to ask, well, what airline do you think we should take? Or do you want to stay in an Airbnb or in a hotel? Now, are those the right questions? Or is the most important question, where do you want to go on our trip? Right? Get that opening question right, because that's key to making sure that it sets the tone for the rest of the conversation and how that's going to go. Or let's say you make a breakfast of eggs and bacon and whole grain toast for a family member who's visiting. and you ask them, how was your breakfast? But what if that guest is a gluten-free vegan? It would be the perfect breakfast for some guests, but for a gluten-free vegan, you've actually gotten it all wrong. So the right question was, what would you like for breakfast? Or, I'm thinking of making eggs, bacon, and whole wheat toast. Would that work for you? So questions help you make sure that you're spending time on the right things. This is a quote I'm going to share with you from Einstein that I really like. And he said, if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on it, I'd use the first 55 minutes determining the proper questions to ask. Now, hopefully your life doesn't depend on the questions that you're asking, because I'm going to need to really change our discussion today if that's the case. But considering that often time and money is at stake and time and money is impacted by your questions, it's worth taking the time to learn the best techniques at getting those questions right so that you can master the skill and be asking the right questions in the moment. The other thing that's important is that questions reconcile how things look and how things are. Questions help us overcome our biases and our blind spots by helping confirm or reconcile the truth of what we're seeing and what's really going on. So you may be talking to someone and making some assumptions that all is well with them because, they look fine. But you'd be wrong to assume that your eyes are able to determine how they truly feel. You need to confirm your assumptions with questions. So, for example, you might say, gosh, it seems like you had a good time at the event last night. How would you say the event went? I don't know when the last time we all were at events but that is a way to confirm what you thought you saw someone experiencing. Is that what they were experiencing? Or it seems like the new employee is fitting in, but I'd love to get your personal take on how you think their integration is going. Just because a situation looks a certain way to you and to your eyes doesn't mean that that's really how things are, and questions can help confirm that. I've had a number of times where I've been with my husband at an event that maybe I found really sort of difficult to be at and I couldn't wait to leave, only to have my husband say in the car, well, that was really fun. Realizing that we had very different experiences of the event that we had been at. So you want to use questions to make sure that what you see with your eyes is indeed true and that you're not projecting your assumptions onto that situation. And this is really important to me as a market researcher. I know we have some researchers on our discussion today. And also for those of you who are leaders in your organization, just because it looks a certain way does not mean it's true. I have had times where I'm with respondents and it sure looks like they like something that I'm showing to them, but I need to ask questions to confirm that. And then oftentimes I have found that just because they're smiling or they're nodding doesn't mean that it's what I think that they're expressing, and questions help you confirm what you're seeing. Now, at this point, maybe some of you are thinking, well, how hard can this be? I mean, I ask questions all the time, but I want to caution you from underestimating the difference between being skilled and thoughtful about asking questions and just feeling like you asked a good question because there was a question mark at the end of the sentence. It's not the same thing. And there are small but important differences that you can make that can immeasurably increase the intimacy from your conversations and the information that you get if you're willing to put a bit of work into this skill. So think about the difference between, this is something that can probably apply to everyone. Think about the difference between if your child or your partner comes home and you say, how was your day? When they come home at the end of the day. Or think about being asked that question yourself. How was your day? Maybe that's a routine that you've gotten in to ask. Well, what's going to be the likely answer? It was fine. It was good. That's what they'll likely say. It's an easy answer, and you'll learn that often that's where people want to go when they respond. They're going to give you the easy answer. But how different would your response be, or their response be, if instead you said, well, what part of your day was most exciting? Or tell me about that meeting you were dreading. Were there any surprises? Or what part of your day made you feel most proud of yourself? This is particularly good for kids, to ask them what part of their day made them most proud of themselves. Way better conversations follow if you ask your questions that way. Those are questions that are going to invite more intimacy and more detail and more opportunity for further conversation. And that really is our goal here. I'm going to keep pointing back to that, during our discussion today. So that brings me to highlight 2 overriding principles that I want to start with, because they're going to apply to all the things that I'm going to share, the 4 keys that I'm going to share, but this is going to apply to everything that I share today about asking questions. So the first is a phrase that I use called disrupt the narrative. Each person comes to you with a story that is at the ready about who they are, the work that they do, and what's important to them or about them. Kind of, you maybe refer to that as their elevator speech. We all have a version of that. If I asked you today, I'm sure that you would all have a narrative about what you would use to describe yourself. And most people automatically draw on that story whenever possible to perpetuate the narrative that they've created about who they are. It makes it faster and easier for them to respond to questions. But it can be counter to what you are trying to accomplish in your discussion with them. You're not necessarily looking for them to just perpetuate their narrative. You're not necessarily looking for fast answers. You're looking for authentic answers. So author Daniel Kahneman's best-selling book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which won a Nobel Prize in economics, you maybe have heard of this book, he speaks about something called System 1 thinking. And that leads to instinctive responses. So when someone says, "How was your day?" the System 1 response is good. It's a short, quick response. It's easier because it ends the conversation and it doesn't invite more questions. And as a question asker, you want to strive to do better than this. You want to strive for more than just a System 1 response, the quickest response. You want to strive for your questions to disrupt this robotic response. That question at the checkout that question to the checkout person at Target is perfectly fine, because you're trying to express concern for them, you're being courteous, and you're saying, "How was your day?" And you want them to know that you truly do care about them, right? By asking them a quick question. But the goal is not to just check the box. And when we've asked that question and we've gotten an answer, sometimes you ask that question and say, "How was your day?" Good, you've been courteous, right? But instead, what we want to do, if we want to elevate our ability to ask good questions, is we want to consider questions that elicit a more honest and authentic answer. So we always want to think about how we might ask the question in the first place that would elicit a more thoughtful, considered response. So when do you know that you've posed a question that disrupts the narrative? Well, when there's hesitation, or when there is a response such as, "Well, gosh, I hadn't thought about it that way," or "I hadn't thought about that before." I really love when I ask a question and I hear that comment, because it's a good sign that I've made someone think. I've disrupted something in their automatic response. And there was no better feeling for me when I was a podcast host that, and even frankly, as a market researcher and a coach, when I am speaking with someone and I hear them say, "Well, no one's ever asked me that before." That's pure gold for me. And that moment of reflection before the response will signal a shift to what Daniel Kahneman refers to as System 2 thinking. Again, this is in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And what follows after that pause is a more thoughtful, conscious, authentic answer. And so that's what we're going to be striving for, is disrupting this narrative and getting them to give you a more honest answer. So again, just to recap, System 1 answers are fast and easy and robotic, and we're striving for System 2 answers that are thoughtful, considered, and authentic. And so that hesitation before the automatic response indicates you've gotten the person where you want them to be. And we'll be talking more about this during our discussion today, but this is one of the most important things that I can share with you to help you consider how to elevate the quality of your questions and how to think about how you design your questions. Now, the other guiding principle that I want to start having you think about is stay curious. Now, it might feel like a real challenge to try to determine exactly the right wording to use to upgrade your language around your questions. I'm going to give you a lot to think about today. And by the way, you're welcome to take screenshots with your phone of any of the slides, or we can talk afterwards if you want some of them. I get that we're going to talk about a lot of different language today, but if you simply keep the mindset of staying curious and having curiosity lead you, that itself is going to carry you very far. Your words don't have to be perfect. As long as the spirit of curiosity is there. I mean, listen, you know how good it feels when someone is genuinely curious about you. You want to tell them more if they actually seem to be interested. So be that person, right? Come to a conversation with curiosity and with the intent to have someone feel heard. How wonderful is it to feel heard? You want to be that person. So bring that curiosity to your conversations. So these two principles will be woven through our discussion today. And so I wanted to put them out there for you early to understand this orientation that I'm going to be speaking to you from. So as Andrew mentioned, I'm going to be talking about 4 keys to asking better questions. And the question in putting together this discussion about keys to asking better questions was not how to fill the time that's allotted to us today, but how not to keep you here for 3 days. Because literally, this is a topic that could fill multiple presentations, multiple perspectives on questions. So today I'm focusing on what I think are the best fundamentals and ideas that I think I can share with you that have the most impact no matter what work you do, and will be the easiest for you to implement, no matter what kind of perspective you're coming to this conversation with. So that being said, we're going to focus on 4 key tips to asking better questions. So let's go through them real quick right now. So you want to know your key categories of questions. We're going to talk about sort of the bigger categories of questions that you can ask. We're going to talk about being fluent in the keywords that are important building blocks for your questions. We'll be focusing on how important it is to mine for details using your questions. And we'll close by talking about how to bring your humanity to the questions that you ask. So let's get started. I want to remind you, I'm going to try to keep my eye on the chat here. Please drop questions in the chat if there's something that you want me to cover, or share your thoughts, and I'll try and keep an eye on it to keep our conversation dynamic. So let's start by talking about the key categories of questions. This is one of the most fundamental things that I think about when constructing your questions, and that is these key categories. So for example, let's start with the first one, closed-ended versus open-ended. A closed-ended question is one that can be answered with one word, and usually that's with a yes or a no. So an example would be, did you have a good day today? Do you want to have dinner at 6? Okay, those are closed-ended questions. They generally have one-word answers. An open-ended question allows for and encourages an answer that is not one word, but rather is more of an invitation to a conversation. So consider the difference. What have you been up to since I last saw you? What are you thinking you'd like to have for dinner? Can you feel the difference in those 2 questions? So the difference here, I've put up these stoplights because I think that reflects some of the difference. Closed-end questions can lead to a dead end. They can make it feel like that conversation has been brought to a stop with a one-word answer. Open-ended questions can give you the green light for more conversation with the person you're talking to. Open-ended questions signal that you're inviting conversation and you're allowing for more personal input in the responses, and you want to open a dialogue with them. As importantly, this approach to your questions also feels more approachable, honestly, and less didactic and potentially confrontational. Closed-end questions can make people feel put on the spot, honestly. So as much as you can, you want to seek to choose questions that are open-ended if you want to have an expansive dialogue. For me, in fact, open-ended questions often start with, tell me about ... right? And that leaves a very open space for a response. Tell me about your recent vacation. Tell me about your first week at school. Both are invitations to further conversation. So hopefully you can see that's got stop and go light. Closed-end questions can be a bit of a stop. Open-end questions can be more of a go. All right, direct versus indirect questions. The one exception where a closed-end question is the best choice is when you need to get a definitive, direct answer. Sometimes this is called for when you find that someone's being evasive, or when you need a commitment or you need clarity. For example, will you get this painting job completed by Sunday? Or do you believe they're telling the truth? All right. So just this past weekend, I found myself using it very specifically in a conversation with my husband. Sorry, I keep using him for examples, but I like to give real life examples where I use this. As you all, if some of you are in Wisconsin, maybe some of you are in the Midwest, we're getting a bit of cooler weather, and it's been nice because we've been able to have the house open, but it got really warm this weekend. And it kind of came to be true that on Sunday it was getting too warm, and we were kind of thinking about closing up the house, and my husband had been outside and he came in my house and we were going back and forth, and he said, "Oh, it's actually quite nice out." And we talked, and I finally looked at him and I said, "Are you saying you want to close the house?" Because we were kind of circling it, and a closed-end question is what I needed. I needed to know what he was really getting at. Are you saying we should open the house up, or are you saying we should close the house up? And so direct questions need to be used selectively, because they can, again, come across as a bit abrupt or even confrontational, but sometimes you need a definitive answer. You need to cut to the chase. And in this case, the back and forth was a waste of time when a direct question really got us to the answer. Earlier, I shared an example of a direct question. Will you get this painting job completed by Sunday? Now, I want to give you an example of an indirect version of what that question would be. So the indirect version of that question would be, when do you think you'll be completing the painting job? So do you see that? Will you get it completed by Sunday? When do you think you'll get it completed? All right. Now, it's fine to use the indirect version if you're trying to not necessarily have the person you're speaking to feel pressured. But if you have done any home remodeling lately, I've done a lot of home remodeling in the last 2 years. I have found that sometimes I have to be direct with contractors and with people who are working on aspects of our project. I need an answer and I need a commitment. So direct questions will achieve that. So I'll say, will the bathroom remodeling be done by October 1st? Will the painting be done by next Friday? Again, this is an appropriate time to use closed-ended and direct questioning versus indirect questioning. Okay, hopefully that all makes sense, and you can see how you can use this in your life. I'm trying to give you examples from real life here. So the last category of questions I want to talk about includes words that you might be as familiar with. In fact, I know Lynn, who's a qualitative researcher on this conversation, is familiar with. But I think it's worth looking a bit more closely at these because these terms really relate to the type of content that you're trying to collect in a conversation. So the word qualitative, as you would expect, is about the quality of something. So as it relates to questions, there are questions that will elicit information and answers that are not about numbers, but are about the characteristics or the attributes of something, or the feelings and experiences that the person you're speaking to can share. So a qualitative question and answer might be, how was your experience attending UW-Madison? And that might lead to a response such as, oh, I really loved all my friends that I met and my colleagues and professors, and I'll never forget my time there. Can you see that? That's about the quality of their experience at UW-Madison. Quantitative questions, however, are seeking answers that are bounded by numbers or measurements. So you ask those questions when you want to get a sense of the size or scope or frequency of an item or of an experience. So a quantitative question might be, how many hours did you study while you were, how many hours a day did you study while you were getting your degree at UW-Madison? And the type of response you're looking for here would be, I found I needed about 20 hours a week just to do the reading assignments. Okay, do you see that? That's more about giving some magnitude, giving some size. The qualitative question gives you insight onto some of the emotional experience of the student, whereas the quantitative question informs you about the time demands. So you would seek out a qualitative question to get rich texture about an object or something else that you're inquiring about. The quantitative question yields numbers and measurements, And that can be data that you can use to evaluate or analyze a situation or an event. So at a fundamental level, knowing these key categories of questions, closed-end versus open-end, direct versus indirect, and qualitative versus quantitative, can give you some general guidelines for what kinds of questions might be best for whichever situation that you're in. Now, the next key to asking better questions I want to share with you are some keywords and phrases that are good to become familiar with as you work on mastering your questioning skills. So think of keywords as tools in your toolbox of asking questions. These two are fundamentals, just like knowing the categories of questions are. These are also fundamentals that you want to be more fluent in, so you can turn to them and reach for them depending on the situation and how a conversation might evolve. Let's start with the keywords that you're most likely familiar with, and that is the 5 W's and an H. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Probably heard those before. I think I actually first learned about these back in my Journalism 101 class, my freshman year in college. It's pretty fundamental, basic journalism teaching. But you've likely used them all the time in your everyday language. So to up your question skill, you want to think about how you can use the subtleties of these words to change the answers that you can get from your questions. Now, most of these words are used most commonly for closed-end questions. So, who attended the event with you? What is the name of Susan's new dog? When are you arriving in Chicago? Where is the event tonight? See that? That was who, what, when, where I think I used in closed-end question situations. That's probably how you use them most on an everyday basis. Now, as we discussed, open-ended questions lead to more complete responses, and that's often really what you're looking for in most conversations that you're having. So if you want to use these words to create more open-ended questions, then ask people more about their experiences than data. Ask them about their experiences. So who did you connect with most at the party? What was your favorite memory of your trip to the Grand Canyon? Okay, that's still using who and what, but you're pointing them to an experience and you're inviting them into a conversation to explain more about an experience that they have. And this is an important subtlety. Who did you attend the event with will be responded likely with a name or a couple names. But who did you connect with most at the event invites a follow-up response about the connection that they found, that they had with this person at the party. So using questions to ask about an experience often makes your follow-up questions much more obvious and easy to identify and will lead to a more in-depth further conversation. And the way you really want to up your question game is, frankly, to lean less on the word why and more on the words what and how. Okay? Lean less on the word why, more on the words what and how. So let's explore this a little bit. When you start your questions with the word why, it can come across as too direct and too personal or too much too soon. In addition, starting a question with why usually leads to you asking about someone's motivation or reason for doing something. And often they don't really know why, or they're not really willing to say it out loud. And so either way, it's a wasted question that's going to lead to inaccurate or vague answers. So here's some examples, and I want to have you sit with these questions as I ask them. Pretend that I'm asking you these questions. Why did you take that route to the mall? Why have you not gotten that book read yet? Why are the bushes so overgrown? Okay, so how did those questions make you feel when I said those out loud? For most of us, those questions will feel a little bit aggressive. They might cause someone to feel that their motives are being questioned, or they might put them on the defensive. And as much as possible, you want to avoid putting someone on the defensive with your questions, because it can change the entire tone of the conversation, and it's very hard to recover when you've put someone on the defensive. So there's two things to remember to avoid this when you use the word why to start a question. Ask why about an overall circumstance or about their thoughts on what might have led to a situation happening, and less so about them. So for example, why do you think the product launch didn't meet our goals? That's about the entire process, not about them. Okay, that's a way to start it with why. Or why do you think our customers might be so frustrated? Okay, these are less likely, to create less defensiveness. I think I did a double there. These are less likely to create defensiveness in the person that you're speaking with, and more likely to seem like an inquiry about their knowledge or their expertise about something. It's about the shift of what the focus of that why question is. Now, more importantly, the words how and what are often a far better way to open a question seeking out motivation. So for example, what was your thought process in changing careers? Or what does your gut tell you is the best choice? Or what did you take into consideration when deciding to start your own business? Or how do you see this playing out over the next year? So sit with those questions. How did those make you feel? I think if you were asked them, you can feel the sense of the subtlety that I'm talking about when I say, how do those questions make you feel? Frankly, that's one of the best things you can do to be a good question asker, is think, how would that question make me feel? Because sometimes we can lose touch with that. So that's why I'm asking you to do that. Okay, when I ask you, what did you take into consideration when deciding to start your business? That's a far more invitational question and leads to a better conversation than, why did you start a new business? Right? That sounds more accusatory. So the wording of these questions also has less chance of being misinterpreted, and they show a more honest curiosity about what someone's thought process is, and that you truly want to understand it, and you don't want to blame them or attack them or trap them. Why can be really loaded if you're not really skilled at using it. So when you can, substitute how and what instead. Now, the use of these keywords is one of those habits that's likely very deeply ingrained. I'm expecting you to feel that way, like, oh my gosh, I've been asking questions this way for so long. You've likely spent your whole life feeling that questions always needed to start with the word why. So if there's a key reset that I'd love for you to take away from today, and I certainly hope you'll consider, and that I think can significantly increase the quality and outcome of your questions, it's to practice opening your question sentences with the words what and how. Now, it might take some time to break your habits, but try it and experiment with it today or in the near future, and see if you get different answers. See how the people that you're talking to respond differently, potentially, when you start your questions that way. All right, let's go with our second look into being fluent in keywords. So this is about using language to redirect and focus things. So often we need to have handy keywords that have a different purpose, and that is to redirect and focus the person or the group that you're working with. Often you're going to find that questions you ask are meant to get someone or even yourself unstuck. Okay, you're working with someone who just seems to be spinning, let's say, or doesn't seem to know what to do next. And we can get so single-minded when we're considering an action or making decisions that we don't explore the breadth of our creativity or all the options that are available to us. So redirecting language is a way to bring back focus to the process. And it's another use of keywords in constructing your questions. If you keep some of these keywords handy, you can keep the conversation open and flowing, and you can help facilitate a team or an individual's process, especially if they're stuck. And actually, I got my certification last year in creative problem solving from the Creative Education Foundation. And this is where I learned some of these phrases and some of the ways that we can use questions to keep our thoughts flowing when we're stuck or in unfamiliar territory. Let's talk through some examples, because I think this will help demonstrate it. So the first acronym I have here is IWWMW. I get a little tongue-tied when I say that, so I'll try and take my time to say that. That's an acronym for in what ways might we? In what ways might we? So this is a great phrase to nudge things back toward the objective or the purpose when maybe that's been lost or buried in the process or in the overwhelm of a situation. This phrase assumes that there's solutions and answers, and that it's just a question of identifying them and seeing the data and seeing what your options are that are aligned with getting to your objective, maybe from a different perspective. The same is true with these other two acronyms that I have here, HMI and HMW, which is how might I or how might we. All right, this is a positive approach to guiding the conversation to identify or rethink a solution. This was a very helpful approach that I and many of my colleagues used at the beginning of all the changes that were brought about when COVID-19 entered our life in March of 2020. I'm sure you all have fresh memories of how stunned we all were when nothing about our lives and our routines was the same. And by saying, in what ways might we continue to stay connected to our customers, even though all of our trade shows are canceled, it allowed a marketing team to stay focused on a solution rather than feeling shut down, right? Think about it. Think if you got the news, as many people did, that all the trade shows were canceled due to COVID-19. Well, if you say, well, in what ways might we still stay connected to our customers, you keep the conversation going, right? I believe that was also the question that DreamBank had to ask. I don't know that they asked themselves that exact question, but when it became clear that they could not have in-person sessions as of spring of 2020, that led them to moving their classes online. And here we are doing this class online. And online classes have been a great success for DreamBank. I was actually supposed to do my first class for DreamBank in person in July of 2020. And moving it all online, I think that was the first time I had presented actually to an audience online. And now I do it all the time. So creative thinking and helpful questions can propel you to identify good alternative outcomes when the path that you thought you were going to be able to take is no longer available. Now, as I mentioned, I'm also a market researcher, and I had an in-person taste test planned with a client in the middle of April of 2020. So again, really early in the closure of everything. And about the second week in March, it became clear to me there was no way we were going to be doing an in-person taste test. But rather than being stalled and canceling the project, as many of my colleagues had to do when things shut down, I said, well, how might we continue to connect with consumers to get feedback on this product? And so I worked with a facility, and because they were going to host the in-person interviews, and I approached my client about doing it in their homes instead. And so the client agreed, and so we had product delivered, the product they were going to come in and taste. We had it delivered to their homes. All the people that we were going to be talking to, I interviewed them over Zoom, and it was a huge success. As you can imagine, in late April 2020, if you remember, people were thrilled to get food sent to their home. And they were so excited to talk to me during a time when everyone was working and studying at home. And so it was a huge success. And we continued to do another project actually over Zoom later in the summer, once that my client had had some experience seeing how well people took to that. And so this was not something I'd done for a client before, but that how might we question allowed us to remain open to what the possible solutions might be, since what we were planning couldn't be used anymore. So compare these phrases, in what way might we, or how might we, to what you might have used in the past, like now what, right? In a situation where you realize that you don't know what comes next, now what has a bit of a victim quality to it. It feels like you're a little bit lost, and it's not very helpful. Like, now what do we do, right? Using these other phrases, in what way might we and how might we, you always keep your focus on the goal, right? For example, how might we put together our dream wedding despite concerns about the pandemic? That positions you for success. You keep your eye on the goal, and yet you stay open rather than just saying, well, now what, all right? These are all, again, keywords, key phrases that you can keep handy to keep conversations going. I'll mention one other proactive phrase to get refocused, and that is, what will you or what would you do? And that's represented, that's represented with the acronym WWYDI. This helps you expand thinking about potential scenarios in the future when thinking is stuck in your current situation. Then that helps you think through some potential outcomes. So those other ones were more about in the present. This is more about thinking about outcomes in the future. So for example, you might say, well, what would you do if your boss that you love leaves? Or what will you do if your work exclusively becomes remote for the rest of the year? I actually just used one of these phrases with someone I was coaching with who was concerned about some potential changes that might happen in their job. And we walked through the scenario. Well, what would you do if, or what will you do if? This question assists and facilitates so that you don't get frozen when you're in a crisis or if you're anticipating some big change, but you remain open to a broader range of potential solutions. It's important to also avoid the desire to accept the first answer to the question and move on, to sort of check the box, so to speak. The key to being better at asking questions is to not rush through or accept the first answer, but to invite the person you're speaking to share more and to give more details. You can do this with your body language and with some simple phrases I've got written here, like, tell me more about that, or, and what else? That's called the AWE question, AWE, and what else? So here's some other examples. You might say, that must have been a really unique experience. Tell me more about what you were feeling at the time. Even simple phrases of engagement or head nodding and eye contact let someone know that you're listening and you're engaged and that you want to know more. And you don't need formal questions sometimes in that moment. Your interest and your attention is really engaging enough to, frankly, be more powerful than any questions that you could ask at the time. Silence and a head nod are, in fact, one of the best ways to invite more, to encourage discussion, and to help someone feel heard, and to guide the conversation toward a deeper place. Think about the last time that you had a heart-to-heart with someone. Hopefully you've had a chance to get together with someone in person and do that, but it usually involves a healthy amount of listening and being ready and open to shutting up when the situation calls for it. People are often so thrilled that someone's actually listening to them and paying attention. So, give them both of those and you're going to get more responses to your questions. I find that sometimes people are even shocked that when I demonstrate that they really have my full attention and that I'm clearly eager to hear what they have to say. Another key thing to remember is to have language ready to invite more from someone who has come to a solution that you actually are quite certain is not the best one for them, but you don't want to tell them what to do. There's nothing good that can come from telling anyone what to do. People need to own their decisions on their own, for them to really stick to following through. However, we've all been in situations where we'd love to help someone avoid what we know is not likely the best choice for them. Or you've also maybe been on the receiving end of having someone that you care about give you reason to rethink a decision, and you're grateful that they did. So the phrase, or what else could it be? Or is there another option? Those are both phrases that can cause someone to pause with the answer that they've come to and to give them the opportunity to rethink it. For example, if someone says, well, I think the best option is to sell the business, if you personally don't necessarily think that they've given enough consideration to that solution or considered other options, a helpful phrase to invite them into more reflection might be, or what else would be a way for you to move forward? Or what other options have you considered? Or what aspects of your consideration led you to this decision? Those all cause them to talk out loud about it, right? And sometimes talking out loud allows us to see the decision that we've come to from a different perspective. And these questions might at least help to plant a seed and get them to give their decision another look. All right, so that's a lot about keywords, a lot of tools for you there, but those are really, again, foundational and powerful, these keywords. The third key to asking better questions is to always focus on mining for details. You've heard the phrase, the devil's in the details, and that's absolutely true when you're asking questions. One of the most important keys to asking better questions is to be a miner for details. This is another one of those key takeaways that I personally think makes the difference between good and great questions. Make it your mission to mine for details in the answers of people you're speaking to. So let's look at this again a little bit closer so you know what I mean. Examples are always best, right? So you want to press for details when and where it's appropriate. Now, there's some people in your life who likely share far too many details, and reining that in and reining that discussion in to be productive is a whole nother webinar, because most of the time, and in most cases, the details in a discussion are lacking, and they're glossed over by phrases disguised as a response like, "It was great. He was really nice. Our trip was awesome." Okay, those things don't really say a whole lot, honestly, and you want to start to see that as such. One of the best things to continue to develop in yourself is the ability to determine when it's appropriate to press for more details. This is one of those things that it's going to be hard for me to give you specifics because it can be different in every circumstance, but it's something that you can develop a feel for over time. You know, once you've spent some time getting a sense of, well, is it okay for me to press for details? So the key things to consider is, what are your relationships with the person or the group? You know, do you have an intimate enough relationship to feel that they won't be offended or uncomfortable if you ask for more information? Conversely, sometimes you might not know someone at all, but the flow of the conversation has brought you to a point where the question about details is logical and completely in sync with the conversation that you're having. Sometimes what actually is appropriate is to ask for permission. So saying something like, "I ask what kind of work that you do?" Or, "Do you mind sharing with me about your family background?" Asking for permission shows respect, and that their answer is something that you're truly curious about and you're going to be really present for when they give you a response. Now, in some cases, you already have permission due to your role or relationship, and so you need to worry less about whether you're crossing a line. For example, in my role as a market researcher, when I'm interviewing people who have come in as part of a study, they know that I'm going to be asking them questions about their habits or about the products that they use. And so I'm sort of pre-approved to press people for details. If you're a parent or you're someone's boss, for example, you also have a bit of implied permission to get access to details. Asking what someone's plans are, where they've been, the progress they're making on something you've asked them to do, that's really all fair game to ask and press for details on those questions because of your relationship to that person. Certainly, you want to use natural sensitivity and compassion when you choose your words, but there is less need for sort of tiptoeing. All right, specifics. This is sort of a key word for me. So let's talk about this word specifics. Specifics is an important part of this mining for details, especially when the priority for you is to getting to the truth or developing a better understanding of an event or situation that you might not have been at, but you need to understand more fully. So I am going to put a picture of a funnel up because I sometimes think of mining for specifics, like moving from the wide to the narrow end of a funnel. This type of question usually requires you to put together a series of questions that close in and get more detailed as you go. So this might sound something like this. How was the party? Who was there that I would know? Was there dancing? Did you dance with anyone? John? Great. Well, do you think that you're going to have a further conversation with him or get together afterwards? Okay, so that's just an example, but you can see that I kept moving from broad to specific over the course of about 4 or 5 questions. And in the answers that I would get a really good sense of what the situation was at that party, or at least a pretty good situation. I have a running joke with friends of mine that I can get to the truth or at least a good sense of what was going on in 4 questions, maybe 5. But if you continue to spiral those questions and build on them, you can get a pretty good sense of what's going on. While this can be used by anyone, I see this technique often used, I think lawyers use this as well to try and spiral in on the truth, but I see this used by customs officials and police to get a sense of when someone might not be telling the truth, or if there's something that they feel like they want to explore further, because maybe there's something that's a little, that they want to understand better. Maybe there's something suspicious or unexpected going on. So I have reason to go back and forth to Canada. I think Lynn is in Canada, one of our attendees today. I have reason to go back and forth to Canada. We have some property there. And we were just recently there. And I always watch the customs officials asking questions when we cross the border and when we come back across. They say things like, where are you headed? Whose car is this? What are you doing while in Canada? This series of questions that they ask is all intended to see if you hesitate or to see if you don't have ready answers. And that gives them a reason to see any red flags or see places where they want to maybe push their questions further. I will admit that I used this when I had teenagers in my house to make sure that I was getting at the truth. So it might have started something like this. You're headed to John's house with your friends? Will his parents be home? Yes? Okay, so if I call over there after you leave, a parent's going to answer the phone? And do they know that you and your friends are headed over there? Who else is going to be there? What time are you going to be expected to be home? Okay, again, I spiral those down in a funnel to make sure that I'm understanding the truth. So I use this to great effect, actually. And I encourage it if you find yourself in a similar personal or work situation, pressing for specifics with at least 2 or 3 additional questions can help reveal any red flags if there are any. I should say I didn't have any red flags with my teenagers, but it still was effective to let them know that I was going to be asking about the details. This is also a really helpful technique to get a better sense of a situation that you're trying to understand or be able to recall to someone, which we get ourselves in that position sometimes. Maybe you've been in this situation with your spouse or someone else in your household where there's this gap where there's just no specifics. So someone comes back from being with a friend and you say, well, how's Mark's wife doing? I don't know. How are the wedding plans going for Mark's son? I don't know. Okay. This is likely a common occurrence when your questions aren't getting you anywhere and that you're not getting any details, and that can happen. So when the shoe's on the other foot and when you know that you're going to be asked questions about stuff, be a good observer, be a good listener, and make sure that you're paying attention to specifics. This means that, for example, if you have been at a family reunion, you don't want to come home and just say, oh, the family reunion was great. Okay. You want to be prepared to say, oh, there were 50 people at the reunion and it was held at the park down the street from where my grandparents lived. We had some great dishes at the potluck, and Aunt Sally brought her favorite potato salad, which she said she loves to bring to family reunions. And we also played cornhole, and Joe and Kelly won the family tournament. Okay? Again, this means being a good observer of specifics and asking questions when necessary to really get a feel for an experience if you're trying to recall it to someone who was not there. As you can imagine, I'm constantly challenged to do this as a researcher. I can't just say to the client, oh, they thought your product was great. That doesn't tell them anything. I need to be able to say at the very top level, I need to be able to say, most of the people in the study loved the taste of your product, but they found that the package was really hard to open. Okay, do you see the difference when you mine for specifics? This is a very big differentiator that can be the result of asking great questions. I think I see a question coming in, so I just want to look at that real quick. Have you run into situations, Kate is asking this, have you run into situations when asking for specifics caused defensiveness or felt like interrogation to the receiver? That's a really good question. I spoke a little bit about this, which is this is something you have to develop a feel for, and it depends on what your relationship to the person is. In some cases, like I said, if you're a customs official, it doesn't really matter if you've offended someone. That's your job. You have to do that, right? So you have to really make a decision about how can you, and this is where practicing this, how can you use your phrasing so that it doesn't come across as that you're trying to be accusatory or to put them on the defensive. Sometimes if you let them know how this will help you, that helps. So sometimes I'll say, it would help me get a better picture if you could give me a little more specifics about who was in attendance at that event or what kind of customers were at that event. Let them know that they're going to be helping you with those specifics. And I think that then takes the edge off of making them feel like they're being interrogated or that they're being put on the defensive. Sometimes I exactly understand what you're saying, Kate. You have to be very careful. And that's why I spent some time talking about that. You have to understand and prime your relationship with that person to get to that point, develop a sense of trust with them, make it very clear that you have pure motives and you're just trying to understand. And Kate, you said perhaps starting with a statement of intent and why you're asking. Absolutely. Transparency and truthfulness wins all day, right? If they think that you have something to hide and you're trying to trap them, well, of course, I would react the same way. If you can be very transparent and say, it really would make me feel more comfortable if I knew exactly how this trip was going to go. Can you tell me more about the details about what you're going to be doing on that trip? So I feel like I've got peace of mind. Right? That makes them feel, again, like they're helping. Thank you for asking that question, Kate. That's a really good question. And that's why this is a bit of a soft part of the skill, is you have to be able to, read the situation. And this is why practicing and experimenting with your language is a really good way to get better at it. All right, so let's talk about this last part of mining for details. So a third point here under mining for details is to not accept canned answers. One of the times you will find me screaming at the television is when I see an interviewer blow through answers to questions that are clearly surface and superficial. It's maddening because so often an opportunity is missed to get real insight. There are many times when someone is looking for the easiest, most convenient answer to get out of that conversation as quick as possible. In fact, many times that's the case. And they do that by giving responses that are easy and they think will satisfy you and will end the conversation. So I implore you to start to recognize canned or superficial answers, to be prepared to ask a follow-up question that strives for a more unique and insightful answer. If someone says, for example, I hear people say platitudes like this often, like, well, I just want to help people. That's very general. You want to prepare to respond with, well, tell me what that means for you. Or that sounds wonderful. What do you feel are the best skills and gifts that you bring to be able to accomplish that, helping people? This is where that disrupt the narrative principle that I mentioned earlier really comes into play. You want to learn to recognize canned answers from a mile away and disrupt that narrative that they're trying to put forward. I'm a big Brewers baseball fan. And I recently saw an interview pre-game, I think this was just last week, with one of the pitchers for the Brewers. And the interviewer asked the pitcher, what do you think is key for the game tonight against the Phillies? And the pitcher's response was, well, I just need to pitch a lot of strikes. Okay, if you're not laughing out loud, if I could, I would laugh out loud. And if you can't see my eyes roll, this is an eye-rolling response. I mean, that was seriously this pitcher's response. And I was screaming at the screen, ask him a follow-up question, because he was clearly just trying to get out of the interview. And the interviewer let him get away with that. So you want to be prepared that you know answers that are too straightforward and ask a follow-up question that's going to dig deeper. Yes, that's right, Kate. Go Crew. They're having a great year. All right, so I love this quote from Carl Jung. Carl Jung is such a master at so many of the things that I talk about in my talks. He said, the ability to ask questions is the greatest resource in learning the truth. And I agree. I have found that the proper use of questions is one of the best ways for me to navigate through a conversation to get to what I feel is a truthful answer. It does take being brave and bold sometimes, But if you stay present and you practice recognizing some of these situations that we've discussed and having ready follow-up questions, that's really key. It will make a huge difference in the responses that you get. Now, the quality of the answers that you receive can be largely impacted by the quality of your questions. You may have heard that term, garbage in, garbage out. If you ask low quality questions, you're going to get low quality answers. So that's why I think this is such an important skill and one that you shouldn't take for granted. Now, the final key to asking better questions is that I want to talk to you about bringing your humanity. Underneath all of the approaches that we've been talking about, one of the key details that you don't want to forget is to make sure that you're bringing your humanity. So as best you can, you want to gauge your energy and your language and your pace to the people that you're talking to. Sometimes I've described this as having like a set of dials that you can dial up or down. Does the person that you're talking to require less energy and more quiet? Or does the person that you're talking to require you be in a high energy space? This is just one of the ways that you differentiate yourself from Google, okay? You want to bring that humanity, be human. So let's talk about some of the ways that you can bring your humanity, again, to the questions that you ask. You want to include personalized language where possible. So whether you're in a situation where you can write your questions out ahead of time or not, or if you're doing it in real time, you're going to benefit by making sure that your language is personable. Don't be robotic. So you don't want to sound like artificial intelligence, that it's, sort of a ping pong back and forth with an artificial intelligence person. Acknowledge things that you know are important to the person that you're talking to, or reference shared experiences. Language like, I'm sensing you have some hesitancy in moving forward for that. Is that accurate? Or from your responses, you seem to have a fondness for cats. Is that true? Am I reading that properly? Or as a fellow Midwesterner, I love to know your favorite local vacation spots. Okay, using words like I and you and we helps make those questions more personable. And again, referring to maybe shared interests that you have or things that you're observing about them. You also want to strive to collect rich responses. We've talked about being aware of not just checking boxes when you get answers to questions and then quickly moving on. Assume that the more space you give for them to respond, the more they might be willing to share with you. Now, this is assuming you're not in a time pressure situation. And sometimes when I'm in a market researcher role, I am in a time pressure situation. But assuming that's not the case, you want to create the space. So be silent and nod, sending a signal that you're listening and that you want to hear more. You don't want to interrupt them with a new question until you know that it appears that they've shared all that they have to share with you. Use your eye contact and your body language to make it very clear that you're fully engaged. And I'll be honest with you, I find it, again, very rare to have a situation where someone is giving me their full attention. It just seems like there's always so many distractions around us. And so when someone's actually listening, it really feels good. And when someone feels like it's important that their opinion matters and that their opinion is important. So you want to create that moment to ensure that the information you are getting is not just at the surface, but it's rich in detail and data. Similarly, 3 of the most human qualities that you can bring to the way that you ask questions are your empathy and your creativity and your range of emotions. So you want to choose language for your questions that authentically express empathy. So for example, you might say, I know this pandemic has affected all of us in different ways. Share with me what has been the biggest change in how you prepare meals for your family now. It's a very market research question. We want to know how people have changed their habits. And expressing that empathy, saying, I understand that the pandemic has affected us all, is a more human way to ask that question. Or, I know your oldest just left for college. How has that change been felt in your home? Okay, that's a very human way to ask a question. You also want to have the flexibility and creativity to adjust your questions and your own energy to the circumstances. Many years ago, I was facilitating a board retreat for an organization in town, and I had a full agenda planned, full day planned. And during the introduction, someone said, well, don't you think we need to address the elephant in the room before we dive into these other topics that you have planned to cover? And it turns out that the people who had brought me there had not told me that there were these elephants in the room. And so I had to throw out literally the entire agenda and on the fly developed a whole new set of questions and have those questions be designed to get at the root of what some of the conflict was that was present that I was not aware of. And frankly, back to the conversation in responding to Kate's question, I had to allow them to trust me. I had to be really honest about the fact that, this was a change, but that I was there for them and we were going to navigate this together. So when you're asking questions, you can't have tunnel vision, okay? You need to be creative and ready to adapt the situation to elicit the best answers to your questions. And sometimes that includes acknowledging or showing your emotion as well, and as well as honoring the emotion of the person that you're speaking to. You don't want to blow past emotion when it's authentically expressed and shared, because that's that rich content. And that is bringing your humanity to your interviews. All right, so that's my 4 keys to asking better questions that I want to focus on today. Let's do a recap and about what we've talked about so far, and then I'll bring us to a close. So first, we started by talking about the key categories of questions as a foundation. And those were open-end versus closed-end, direct versus indirect, and qualitative versus quantitative. I then shared with you some of the keywords that I think are helpful for you to be familiar with. And that's the 5 W's and an H, which is who, what, when, where, why, and how. But remember, you want to strive to use what and how more than you use why. We also talked about some of these keyword phrases that can get you unstuck when you might need to think more broadly about a challenge. Things like, in what ways might we, or how might we, or how might I, or what would you do if? Those are all keywords to help you to get out of a stuck situation. I also stress that you need to mind for details, and that means pressing for specifics and details when it's appropriate, and to make sure you strive for specifics in a conversation. Don't accept canned answers, and that you're ready to do a great follow-up question if anyone does give you a canned answer. Hold them accountable to give you a good answer. And the 4th key that I shared with you was bringing your humanity to your questions. And to do that, you want to use personalized language in the phrasing of your questions. You want to create the opportunity to get rich responses by being present and not interrupting and using your best listening skills. And finally, you want to bring your most important assets, and that's your empathy and your creativity and your emotions, your compassion, and that's something that's unique to you. So in addition to that list, let me give you 2 other principles as we wrap today to keep in mind that I want you to think about in order to bring your best self to asking better questions. Keep this phrase in mind: cause pause. You want to strive to ask questions that cause people to pause and think. It's like putting a speed bump in the questions and that get them present in the moment. Allow space for those authentic answers. Closed-end questions don't generally do that, right? They don't create a pause. They create one-word answers. Open-ended questions will do a better job of getting more complete answers. And questions that are fast and superficial will lead to superficial responses. So we talked earlier about disrupting the narrative, and that applies here. Ask questions that get people to truly pause and think. You know you've gotten there. Remember when someone says, good question. When I was doing my radio show, like I said, I was so excited when someone said that no one had asked them that question before. That was like pure gold for me. So when there's a pause, you know that what follows is an answer that's authentic and honest and not canned. Also, you want to make sure that you point them to themselves. This principle is about designing your questions to strive to point them to themselves. So in our 4 keys, we talked about embodying empathy and making it okay to express emotion. And that can come from asking them about their experiences. So you want to use your questions to have them think about how they feel, have them maybe name the emotions that they're feeling, or to share an experience or reflect on a memory. And you'll find that sometimes people will do anything to not answer questions, especially when they get too close to their emotions. And so you want to make sure that you always point it back to them if you need to, and remind them you're there to learn about their experiences and be committed to getting people to really work from their own experience and point back to themselves. I hope I've impressed upon you the value of becoming really good at asking questions. But if you won't believe me, believe the philosopher Plato. He said the right question is usually more important than the right answer. This is a home run quote for me, because I think particularly if you're a manager or you have employees, you feel like your responsibility is the answers, knowing the answers. And really the opposite is true. The more important thing is getting the right question. And this is helpful, however, also if you're a parent, but I think it's particularly the pressure that people feel when they have employees. We're often so focused on the answers that we forget that the question is really at the core of our conversations. And not only that, but questions can set the tone for and really be the access key to getting the most insight from your conversations. Now, often people want to know some resources and books that they can turn to. And so I'm going to suggest two. I promise you, if you Google this or if you go into Amazon, there are lots and lots and lots of questions. I'll point to these two that are really top of mind for me because they're the two I've been using most recently. Power Questions by Andrew Sobel and Gerald Pennis is one that I'm actually reading right now. I took it on vacation earlier in August, and I am reading it with dog earring and a pencil because I'm taking a lot of good tips from it. The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Steiner is a book that I actually listened to the audio book of, and I got so much out of it that I bought the hard copy so that I can go ahead and dog ear and underline the parts of that were really helpful to me so that I can use that as a reminder. And these books are really written from a business perspective and a coaching perspective, but I really think that they can be helpful for situations beyond that. They're both really good at giving you suggestions of go-to questions that you can add to your toolbox. And so if you find that it's more difficult for you to think of the right words in the right, in the right occasion, in the right moment, these authors suggest phrases and questions that you might find really helpful to add to your own toolbox. So again, thank you so much for having me here today and allowing me to share my thoughts with you on the importance of asking good questions and for listening to my suggestions. I would love so much to hear if this is helpful to you. So on the screen are my email and my social media links. Feel free to drop me a note if you'd like to let me know what was helpful to you. I also want to thank American Family and DreamBank for giving me this opportunity to speak to you today. Again, it's always great to work with Andrew, and we have more events planned together, so watch their schedule. We do have some time left, I think about maybe 5 minutes or so. I'll look in the chat, but I welcome your questions if you want to wrap with any other remaining questions that you have. Okay, so Kate is also recommending The Coaching Habit. Yeah, it's a great sort of very quick read. I think it's about a 5.5-hour audiobook maybe. And it's almost like a reference book that you can always go back to and look at some of the chapter summaries if you need to just need a little nudge to come up with some good questions for a situation you're facing.
Thank you so much for that, Chris. It looks like it's just the book still up there. I didn't know if you had another slide for your.
I do. I do. I got so carried away by talking about the books. Sorry. This is my information. You're welcome to follow me on Twitter or on Instagram. And I'm also on LinkedIn. I didn't put that up there, but I think most professionals these days are on LinkedIn. You're welcome to connect with me there. I post things on occasion that you might find helpful.
Wonderful. Well, I went and prompted the audience for any questions. It doesn't look like anything has come in quite yet, so we'll give that a few more moments. I want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their day over the noon hour to join us here. I want to thank Chris for putting together this wonderful presentation. Lots of great nuggets to take away. And lastly, I want to highlight the Dream Summit as well. I put a link earlier in the presentation, but it's a 2-day event, October 6th and 7th. It's going to be a great representation of the 9 different event series that we offer at DreamBank through the speakers that we have. Again, a few folks I named before, but also Natalie Nixon, Daniel Pink, Kristen Hadid, Dr. Alex G, just to name a few. I'll go ahead and make sure that I link that in the presentation as well. Well, with that being said, it looks like there aren't any other questions that have come in at this point. Lots of praise as well for you, Chris, though.
Yay.
So we will go ahead and cap it there, and we will see you all next time.
Have a great week, everyone.